They called me foolish. They called him desperate. But none of them knew what I felt when I looked into his eyes. 40 years older than me. A lifetime of stories etched into his face. Yet somehow, he saw me in a way no one my age ever did. People whispered behind my back. They said it would never last. But love doesn't ask permission. It just takes root where you least expect it. When I first met him, it wasn't in some fairy tale way. It wasn't love at first sight. It was quiet, ordinary, almost unremarkable. I was sitting in a cafe, lost in my own thoughts, scrolling through my phone. When he walked in, he wasn't like anyone else in the room. Everyone else seemed in a rush, typing on laptops, laughing loudly with friends. But he walked in slowly, calm, almost timeless. He carried an old leather briefcase, worn but dignified. His coat was neat, his posture steady, his hair silver, but his presence strong. Something about him drew attention, not loud, not demanding, but magnetic. I looked up once, then looked back at my phone, but then I felt his eyes on me, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me feel seen. A few minutes later, he sat at the table across from mine. He ordered tea, not coffee like everyone else. That detail stuck with me, because it felt deliberate, like he wasn't trying to be like the rest. I don't know why, but I kept sneaking glances at him. And each time, he seemed to catch me, not with a smirk, not with arrogance, but with the smallest kind of smile. That's how it began. Not with fireworks, but with silence, with patience, with noticing. The first words we shared came by accident. I dropped my pen on the floor. It rolled near his shoes. He picked it up, handed it back, and said softly, "Careful. You might lose more than just a pen if you're not paying attention." It wasn't what he said, but how he said it. Like every word mattered. Like there was weight behind it. I laughed nervously, thanked him, and for a moment, our eyes held. Long enough for me to feel something. Unfamiliar, unsettling, but strangely comforting.
We didn't speak again that day.
But when I left the cafe, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Not because he was handsome, though he was, in a dignified, seasoned way, but because he felt different, grounded. While I was floating aimlessly through my own life, over the next few weeks, I saw him again. Always at the same cafe, always at the same table, always with the same cup of tea. At first, it was coincidence. Then, it felt like fate. We began with small talk. The weather, the books he carried, the quiet music in the background. And slowly, almost without realizing, the conversations deepened. He told me about his travels, the cities he had seen, the lessons life had taught him. I told him about my dreams, my fears, the way I felt stuck, unseen. He listened, truly listened. Not the way people my age did, half distracted, waiting for their turn to speak. He listened like every word mattered, like my voice was worth hearing. That's when I realized he wasn't just older, he was wiser, patient, kind. And being around him made me feel like I wasn't drifting anymore, like I had an anchor. The bond formed quietly, over teacups, over shared silences, over stories whispered in corners of a noisy cafe. But not everyone would see it that way. When I mentioned him to my friends, they laughed. They called him Grandpa. They said, "What could you possibly have in common with a man like that?" Their words stung, but what stung more was how shallow they sounded compared to the depth I felt when I was with him. My family wasn't much different. When they first noticed I was spending time with him, their eyes narrowed. Their voices turned sharp. They asked questions. Too many questions. Why him? What does he want from you? Are you out of your mind? At first, I tried to explain. I tried to tell them. It wasn't about age. It was about connection. But no one wanted to understand. They already decided what it was, what it wasn't. That's when the first cracks appeared. Not between him and me, but between me and the world around us. It felt like everyone was against us. And yet, that made me hold on tighter. Because every time I sat across from him, every time he spoke, every time he smiled, I knew what I felt was real. No amount of whispers, laughter, or judgment could erase it. Still, deep inside, a small voice asked, what if they're right? What if I'm just blind to the truth? I pushed that thought away. But even as I smiled with him, even as I laughed at his jokes, even as I leaned into his wisdom, the seed of doubt had been planted. And seeds always grow. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And our connection only deepened. The cafe became our meeting place. Our small world inside the bigger one that judged us. We didn't plan it, but it was as if time itself carried us back there. Over and over again. He always ordered tea, and I always teased him for it. Why not coffee? I'd ask. And he would smile, that patient, amused smile, and say, tea doesn't rush. Coffee does. I've learned to enjoy the slower things. That was him, always reminding me, in his gentle way, that life wasn't a race. It was a journey. We sat for hours sometimes, talking about everything and nothing. He shared memories from decades ago, lessons carved into his soul, mistakes he regretted, victories he barely celebrated. And in return, I shared pieces of myself I had never shown anyone else, the insecurities I hid, the fears that kept me awake at night, the loneliness I couldn't admit to friends. He never judged, never dismissed me, never made me feel small. Instead, he made me feel like I mattered, like my thoughts were worth listening to. That simple act gave me a kind of courage I didn't know I had. Soon, we weren't just meeting in cafes. We went for walks in the park, quiet dinners, long drives where the radio played softly in the background. It felt normal, natural, effortless. But the world around us didn't see it that way. One night, while we walked hand in hand, I noticed the stares. Some whispered, some frowned, some laughed. And though I tried to ignore it, I couldn't stop the sting. Later that evening, I told him how it made me feel. He looked at me with those steady eyes that had weathered storms long before me. And he said, people fear what they don't understand. Their words aren't truth. They're just noise. I wanted to believe him, and for a while, I did. But when I introduced him to my closest friend, things shifted. She forced a smile, pretended to be polite. But when we were alone, she exploded. Are you serious? He's old enough to be your father, maybe even your grandfather. What's wrong with you? Her words pierced me, not because I believed them, but because they came from someone I trusted. For the first time, I felt torn between two worlds, the one where I felt alive with him, and the one where everyone told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The tension grew. Every family dinner became a battlefield. Every call with friends a hidden interrogation. I started to lie. I told them I was busy with work, busy with classes, busy with anything that wasn't the truth. Because the truth was too heavy to explain. And even if I tried, I knew they wouldn't listen. They had already made up their minds. But he was different. He never asked me to choose, never pressured me to cut ties, never made me feel guilty for the conflict raging in my life. He simply reminded me, love isn't about possession, it's about freedom. If you ever feel trapped, then it isn't love. Those words stayed with me. They gave me strength, but they also scared me, because part of me wondered, would he ever let me go if I chose differently? One evening, while we sat in his home for the first time, I noticed the photographs on his shelves, pictures of a life I had never seen, smiling faces, children, family gatherings, milestones captured in frames. And suddenly, it hit me. He had lived entire decades before me, whole stories I wasn't a part of. I stared at one photograph, a younger version of him with a woman by his side. She looked happy, radiant, in love. And though the frame gathered dust, the image burned into me. "Who is she?" I asked softly. His smile faded. His eyes clouded. And for the first time, he looked fragile. "She was my wife," he whispered. "She passed away years ago." The silence that followed was heavy. I reached for his hand. But deep inside, a strange fear took root. I realized I wasn't his first love, not even close. And I never could be. That night, I lay awake replaying it all. His stories, his wisdom, his photographs, his age. And I wondered, was I just filling a void for him? Was I just a fleeting chapter in his long book, while he was becoming my entire story? The thought terrified me, because for the first time, the cracks weren't just outside. They were inside me. Whispers of doubt, shadows of envy, the fear of not being enough. And though I smiled the next morning, though I held his hand like nothing had changed, I knew something had. Something invisible, but powerful, had taken root. The bond between us was still there, stronger than ever. But beneath the surface, the first shadows of tension were beginning to form. The more time we spent together, the more I realized how different our worlds truly were. He carried decades of experiences, while I was just beginning to shape mine. And yet, when we sat across from each other, none of that seemed to matter. He knew things I didn't, not just facts, but truths. Truths you only learn by living, by failing, by getting back up again. When he spoke, it was like listening to someone who had already walked the road I was stumbling through. I admired that, but sometimes it also scared me, because while he seemed steady, unshaken, I often felt lost, confused, unsure of who I was becoming. One evening, we went to a small concert, a local band playing soft jazz in a dimly lit room. I remember sitting there, my head resting on his shoulder, his hand warm around mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. But then, I noticed the looks again. The couple at the next table whispering, the young man smirking, the woman raising her eyebrows in disbelief. It wasn't new, but that night, it cut deeper. I whispered, "Do you see them staring?" He squeezed my hand gently. "Yes, but do you feel me here with you? That's all that matters." His words should have been enough, but in the back of my mind, the whispers grew louder, and I began to wonder, was love really strong enough to silence the world? The days that followed were filled with both light and shadows. He introduced me to some of his colleagues, old friends from his younger years. They were polite, respectful, but I saw the question in their eyes. Why me? Why someone so young? One of them even pulled me aside. He said softly, "You seem sweet, but be careful. Age has a way of catching up faster than love can keep up." I smiled, nodded, but inside, the words dug deep. What if one day I became more of a caretaker than a partner? What if one day my youth turned into his burden? I shook the thought away, but it lingered, waiting for quiet moments to return. Then came the night I met his daughter. He had been hesitant, unsure if the time was right, but eventually, he invited me to a family dinner. I dressed carefully, nervously, rehearsing polite words in my head. When we arrived, his daughter's smile was thin, her eyes cold. She barely looked at me, and when she did, it wasn't with kindness. The meal was quiet, awkward, filled with forced conversation. I tried to be polite, tried to show I cared, But every word felt heavy, unwanted. And then, she said it. "Do you really think this will last? She's younger than me, Dad. Younger than your own children. Do you realize how embarrassing this is?" Her words shattered the fragile piece of a table. He told her to stop, his voice firm, his eyes full of pain. But I sat there, silent, frozen, ashamed. Later, when we left, he apologized over and over. But the damage was done. For the first time, I felt like an intruder, like I had stepped into a family where I didn't belong. That night, I cried quietly, not because I doubted him, but because I doubted myself. Was I strong enough to face not just the world, but his world too? The next morning, he held me close. He whispered, "I choose you, no matter what anyone says." And I believed him, but deep inside, the cracks were spreading. Love is strong, but envy, fear, and judgment are strong too. And while our bond had survived the whispers of strangers, now it faced something much harder, the disapproval of those closest to him. For the first time, I wondered if love alone would be enough to carry us through. The weeks after that dinner felt different. Something heavy hung in the air. Even when we laughed, even when we held hands, even when we tried to pretend nothing had changed, his daughter's words replayed in my mind over and over. "Younger than me, Dad. Younger than your own children." It echoed like a warning, like a truth I couldn't unhear. He tried to reassure me, again and again. He said, "They don't know you like I do. They don't see what I see." And I wanted to believe him. But in the quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, I felt the weight of every disapproving glance, every whispered judgment. I started noticing small things I hadn't before. The way his hands trembled sometimes when he reached for a glass, the way he sighed when he stood up from a chair, the lines on his face that deepened when he was tired. They weren't flaws. They were just signs of a life lived. But now, they reminded me of the gap between us. The years, the decades, the reality I couldn't change. One evening, we sat in the park watching the sunset. The sky burned orange, the world around us quiet, and he said softly, "You know, I never thought I'd feel this again. Not at my age. Not this way." His words touched me, but they also pierced me, because in them, I heard the unspoken truth, that his love for me was something rare, unexpected, maybe even temporary. I smiled, leaned against him, but inside, I felt a flicker of fear. What if one day, he decided the gap was too wide? What if one day, I was the one left behind? At the same time, my friends grew colder. They stopped inviting me out, stopped including me in plans. One of them even said, "We don't know who you are anymore. It's like you've disappeared into his world." And maybe they were right, because more and more, I chose him over them. I chose the quiet evenings, the long talks, the steady comfort of his presence. But with every choice, I lost a piece of my old life. The balance I once had was gone. And though I didn't regret it, I felt the cracks forming between who I was and who I was becoming. The turning point came on a rainy night. We were at his house. The storm outside loud, thunder shaking the windows. I found myself staring again at the photographs on a shelf. His late wife, his children, his life before me. And for the first time, I felt not just fear, but envy. She had shared decades with him, years I could never have. She had been there first, in the moments that shaped him, in the moments that built the man I now loved. I turned away quickly, ashamed of the feeling, but it lingered. It haunted me, no matter how much love he gave me now. I could never erase the past. I could never compete with ghosts. That night, as the storm raged on, I lay beside him, listening to his breathing, and I thought, is love enough to silence envy? Is love enough to silence fear? Because while my heart belonged to him, I was beginning to realize love alone doesn't erase the shadows. When the storm passed, the world looked calm again. But inside me, something had shifted. Something I couldn't ignore anymore. I loved him more deeply than I ever thought possible. But love was no longer the only thing in our story. There was doubt. There was judgment. There was envy. There was fear. And though I tried to bury those feelings, hide them beneath smiles and soft words, I knew, deep down, something was about to break. It happened on a night I never expected. A night that should have been ordinary, safe, simple. But instead, it shattered everything I thought I knew about him. About US. He told me he had a late meeting. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. He had important work, colleagues who still called on him for advice, projects that needed his wisdom. I believed him. Because why wouldn't I? Hours passed. I texted him. No reply. I called once, then twice, then again. Straight to voicemail. My chest tightened. But I told myself not to panic. He was older. Maybe he had just fallen asleep. Maybe his phone had died. But then, a strange feeling washed over me. That heavy silence. The kind that whispers the truth you don't want to hear. I couldn't stay still. I grabbed my coat, stepped into the night rain, and found myself walking. No, running. Toward the cafe where we first met. I don't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe fear. Maybe something deep inside already knew. When I reached the cafe, I saw him, sitting at his usual table. But he wasn't alone. Across from him sat a woman, not much older than me. She was leaning in, laughing softly, her hand brushing against his. And he, the man I trusted, the man I defended, the man I loved, was smiling back. My world froze. The sounds of the cafe blurred. The chatter, the clinking of cups, everything faded. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I stood there, unseen, watching, waiting for it to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. But then, he reached across the table, took her hand, held it gently, the way he once held mine. And in that moment, everything shattered. I stumbled outside, the rain soaking my hair, my clothes, my skin. But the pain inside burned hotter than the storm. I wanted to scream, to confront him, to demand answers. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't believe. When I finally made it home, I sat in the dark, shaking, replaying it again and again. His smile, his hand, her laughter, the betrayal echoing louder each time. The next day, he called me. He spoke as if nothing had happened, as if the night before never existed. And that broke me even more. I answered, my voice steady though my heart trembled. Where were you last night? There was silence. Then his excuse, rehearsed, smooth. Just a late dinner with a colleague. Nothing important. My hands shook. My chest tightened. And the words slipped out before I could stop them. I saw you. I saw her. I saw everything. The silence that followed was unbearable. And then, his sigh. Heavy, tired, guilty. You weren't supposed to be there.
Not.
It's not what you think.
Not.
You're wrong. Just. You weren't supposed to be there. That was the moment denial ended. That was the moment truth cut deep. I dropped the phone, fell to the floor, sobbed until my throat burned. The man I loved, the man I defended against the world, had betrayed me. But in the ashes of that heartbreak, something else was born. A fire, a seed, a whisper of revenge. I had given up everything for him. Friends, family, reputation, trust. And he repaid me with lies. As the tears dried, my hands curled into fists. If love had broken me, maybe revenge could rebuild me. But with that thought came another, darker. What if someone found out it was me? What if my revenge destroyed not just him, but me too? The question hung in the air. But even as fear whispered, anger roared louder. And in that anger, my first plan began to take shape. The days that followed felt like walking through shattered glass. Every step cut deeper. Every breath reminded me of the betrayal. He tried to act normal. Morning coffee, evening conversations, small touches on my shoulder. But behind every gesture, I saw her face, her laughter, her hand in his. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Replay after replay. Why her? Why not me? Wasn't my love enough? I searched for signs I had missed. The unexplained meetings, the tired excuses, the sudden late nights. They were all there, hidden in plain sight, but blinded by love. I never saw them. The ache turned into anger. Anger turned into obsession. And obsession began to whisper revenge. I started watching him closely. Every phone call, every text, every sudden smile he tried to hide. I memorized his patterns, the rhythm of his lies. And slowly, I began to plan. One evening, he left his phone on the counter, unlocked, careless, almost staring me. My hands shook as I picked it up, scrolling through, message after message, confirmation after confirmation. There she was, her name glowing like poison on the screen, her words dripping with affection, with intimacy, with secrets that should have been mine. And worse, his replies, promises,
Endearments.
future plans. Everything he once whispered to me now belonged to her. My chest burned, my vision blurred, but I didn't cry this time. No tears left, only fire. I thought about confronting him, throwing the phone in his face, screaming until he broke. But no, that would give him power. That would make me the weak one again. Instead, I smiled when he came back. I asked him about his day, poured him tea, laughed at his small jokes. And he, so confident, so blind, believed me. That night, I sat by the window, planning every detail, every step. If he could play games with me, then I could play better. The idea began small. What if I exposed him to everyone? What if I shattered the perfect image he built? But then, a darker thought followed. What if I didn't just expose him? What if I destroyed everything he valued? The fear whispered again. What if someone finds out it was me? What if this ruins your life too? But my anger silenced it. If love had cost me everything, what more did I have to lose? The next day, I began gathering evidence. Screenshots of his messages, recordings of his calls. I became a shadow in my own home, smiling on the surface, hunting in the dark. One evening, I followed him, kept my distance, hidden in the blur of the streetlights. He walked confidently, hand in hand with her. They slipped into a quiet restaurant, tucked away from the world, but not hidden from me. Never hidden from me. I snapped photos, their laughter captured forever. Proof that love was no longer ours. Proof of the betrayal. My heart broke with every click, but my resolve hardened. This wasn't pain anymore. This was purpose. When he came home, he looked at me, smiled faintly, kissed my forehead, and I held back the storm raging inside, because he had no idea that I now held the power. I lay awake again, the evidence heavy in my hands, the question burning in my mind. How far would I go? Would I just expose him? Or would I burn everything to ashes? For the first time, The thought didn't scare me. It thrilled me. The seed of revenge had grown, and soon it would bloom. Revenge became my secret companion. Every day, every night, it whispered in my ear. It was no longer just about betrayal. It was about balance, justice, punishment. I studied him like a stranger. Every move, every word, every lie. And the more I watched, the more I realized how easily he lied. Not just to me, but to everyone around him, to his colleagues. He was the wise mentor. To neighbors, the charming gentleman. To me, he had been the loving partner until I saw the cracks. And to her, he played the role of romantic savior. He was living 1,000 lives, and I was about to end every single one of them. I began with his reputation. He guarded it like treasure, always careful, always measured. But what if the world saw the man I had seen? Late at night, I created a file, screenshots of his texts, recordings of his sweet nothings, photos of their secret meetings, each piece carefully labeled, carefully stored. It was a weapon, and I held it tightly, but it wasn't enough, because revenge without risk felt hollow. So I decided to get closer to her, the other woman. I learned her routines, her habits, the places she went when she thought no one was watching. One afternoon, I bumped into her. A smile, a quick apology, harmless small talk. She had no idea who I was. No idea that the woman standing in front of her was the one he went home to each night. Her laugh grated against my ears. Her eyes sparkled when she spoke of her special someone, and I smiled, listening, nodding, playing along. Every word, she said. Another knife twisting in my chest, but also another piece of information for me to use. That night, I stared at myself in the mirror. The reflection was unfamiliar. Not the woman who once loved without doubt, but someone darker, sharper, hungrier. Was I becoming him? Was revenge turning me into the very thing I hated? The thought flickered, but quickly died. Because I didn't care anymore. I thought about her, her innocence, her laughter. Did she know he was lying? Did she know she was just another chapter in his story of betrayal? Or was she as blind as I once was? The anger grew, no longer just for him, but for her too, for stepping into my life, my love, my place. The plan deepened. I would expose them both, not with screaming, not with violence, but with silence, precision, and perfect timing. Still, the fear lingered. What if someone finds out it was me? What if I destroy myself too? But the thrill of danger, the taste of power, made the risk addictive. Every glance he gave me, every kiss he placed on my forehead, now fueled my determination. Because I knew, one day soon, those lips would tremble, those eyes would break, when he realized the truth, that I had seen it all, that I had orchestrated it all. And when that day came, he would feel what I felt. He would drown in the betrayal he created. I slept little, ate less, consumed by this mission, this hunger. Friends called. I ignored them. Family worried. I brushed them off. All that mattered was the plan. Each step, carefully measured, carefully hidden. Every smile I gave him, every laugh I forced, was part of the game. And as the pieces fell into place, I realized something chilling. I wasn't just planning revenge anymore. I was enjoying it. The first move came quietly. No shouting, no scenes, no explosions, just silence. And a single message sent into the world. I chose the night carefully. He was asleep beside me, breathing slowly, peacefully, and I sat there, in the glow of the screen, my heart racing, my hands trembling. One click, and the file I built, every photo, every message, Every proof of betrayal was sent anonymously to his colleagues, his friends, his family, the people who praised him, respected him, trusted him. I watched the bar load, each second heavier than the last, until it was done. Irreversible, permanent, undeniable. I set the phone down, my chest heaving. I looked at him sleeping, and for a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. The next morning, it began. His phone buzzed. Once, twice, then endlessly. He frowned, confused, then pale, as message after message poured in. Calls, voicemails, questions, disbelief. Is this true? How could you? We trusted you. He looked at me, his eyes wild, desperate. Did you know about this? Did you see this? I held my breath and whispered softly, "What have you done?" The panic in his face was almost satisfying, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The ripples spread quickly. His reputation cracked. His colleagues turned cold. His friends stopped answering. Even his family, those who once admired him, now looked at him with shame. And her, the other woman, her name, her face, now tangled with his disgrace. Her life, her reputation. Pulled into the storm, I watched from the shadows. Unseen, unknown, the perfect silence of revenge. But with every ripple came risk. What if he discovered it was me? What if someone traced the messages back? The fear clawed at me, but the thrill, the satisfaction, drowned it out. Nights grew heavier. He drank more, spoke less. The confident man who once walked tall now stumbled through his days, broken, desperate, alone. And I smiled in silence, because this was only the beginning. One evening, he looked at me, tears burning in his tired eyes. I don't know what happened. I don't know why this is happening to me. I stared at him, every memory, every betrayal, every scar flooding back, and I whispered under my breath, so softly he couldn't hear, "This is what you did to me." The game had begun. The first move made, and the consequences, unstoppable. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought wouldn't leave me. If this was only the beginning, how far was I willing to go? And more importantly, would I survive the storm I had unleashed? The walls around him began to close in. His colleagues avoided his eyes. His friends stopped returning his calls. Even his own family turned their backs. He sat in silence at the table, his hands trembling against the wood. The man who once carried himself with pride, now reduced to a shadow. I watched quietly, hiding the storm inside me. Every shake of his hand, every drop of sweat on his brow, was proof that my plan was working, but it wasn't enough, because silence, while satisfying, did not heal the wound he left inside me. I wanted him to look at me. I wanted him to know it was me. That night, I set the final stage. A dinner, just the two of us. Candles lit, soft music playing, the perfect mask of normalcy. He sat across from me, broken, defeated. He lifted his glass. His voice cracked. "I don't know what I've done to deserve this." I stared at him, and finally, I spoke. "You lied to me." His glass rose halfway to his lips. His eyes met mine, wide, searching, desperate. "What are you talking about?" My voice was steady, sharp, cutting through the silence. "I saw you with her. I saw the messages. I saw everything." His face drained of color. His hand shook. You weren't supposed to know." I leaned forward, my words low, deliberate. "You weren't supposed to betray me, but you did." The silence was thick, only the soft flicker of candles filling the air. He set the glass down, his lips trembling. "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to stop. A bitter laugh escaped me. Sharp. Cold. You didn't want to stop. You wanted both. And you thought I would never see. Never know. Never fight back. His hands clenched into fists. You destroyed me, he whispered. They all know now. My name. My life. Everything. I leaned back. My voice calm. Controlled. No. You destroyed yourself. I only showed them the truth. He stared at me, disbelief and rage battling in his eyes. You did this. Yes, I whispered, my lips curling into the faintest smile. I did this. The air grew heavier, the weight of my confession sinking into the room. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. You've ruined me. I stood too, steady, strong. No, you ruined us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Two strangers standing in the ruins of what was once love. And in that silence, the final stage of my plan unfolded. Because what he didn't know was that every word of our conversation, every tear, every whisper, was being recorded. I slipped my phone from the tablecloth, the screen glowing faintly, proof of his guilt, his betrayal, his downfall. And when I pressed send, it flew out into the world, unstoppable, permanent. He looked at me, realization dawning in his eyes. What did you do? I smiled faintly. I finished it. The last candle flickered, the music faded, and in that moment, the final act had begun. He stood frozen, his chest rising and falling, his eyes burning into mine. You recorded this. You sent it to them. Yes, I whispered again, steady, unshaken. Every lie you told, every touch you gave her, every betrayal you thought was hidden, now belongs to the world. His voice cracked, rising with anger. You had no right to destroy me like this. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. No right. And what right did you have? To take my love, my trust, my life, and throw it into her hands? He tried to speak, but the words died on his lips. Because he knew there was no defense, no excuse. The silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. And then, his voice dropped to a whisper. You loved me. I thought you loved me enough to forgive. The laugh that escaped me was sharp, bitter, hollow. Forgive. You didn't want forgiveness. You wanted permission. Permission to lie, to cheat, to break me, and still come home to my arms. His hand shook. His eyes glistened. I was afraid. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of growing old. Afraid she made me feel alive again. I stepped back, the words cutting deeper than I expected. Alive again. As if I had not been enough. As if my love had been a burden. You used my love as a shield, while you sought out hers, I whispered. And when you thought I'd never find out, you smiled in my face and held her hand in secret. He reached toward me, desperate, pleading. I made a mistake. One mistake. Please, don't let this destroy us. I recoiled, my voice sharp, final. One mistake doesn't last months. One mistake doesn't fill nights with lies. One mistake doesn't plan a future with someone else. He dropped his hand, his shoulders sagging, the weight of truth crushing him. You've ruined me, he muttered again, his voice hollow, empty. And for the first time, I saw not the man I loved, but a stranger. Broken, weak, pathetic. I turned toward the door, my voice low, steady. No, you ruined yourself. I only lit the match. His voice cracked behind me, a final attempt to hold on. If you walk away now, you'll regret it. You'll live with this shadow forever. I paused, my hand on the doorframe, and whispered into the silence. The shadow was already here, the day you betrayed me. The door closed behind me, heavy, final, and with it, the last thread of the life we once shared snapped in two. But outside, the air hit differently, cold, sharp, alive. For the first time in months, I breathed without choking on his lies. The world would know. The world already knew. And he would never escape the truth again. Yet, as I walked into the night, a question lingered in the back of my mind. Had I destroyed him? Or had I destroyed myself too? The fallout came faster than I expected. By morning, the whispers had turned into storms. His name filled inboxes. His shame spread through every circle he once belonged to. Colleagues cut him off. Neighbors turned their backs. Even his own family refused to answer his calls. And her, the woman who thought she had stolen his heart, vanished, disappearing into the shadows, leaving him alone in the wreckage. I watched from a distance, my phone in hand, scrolling through the chaos I created. Every message, every accusation, every insult. It was everything I thought I wanted. Until he showed up at my door. Rain poured outside. His clothes soaked. His eyes wild. Desperate. Broken. He stood there, trembling, searching for something that no longer existed. "You did this," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You've destroyed everything." I met his gaze. Steady. Unflinching. "No. You destroyed me first." His breath hitched. His shoulders shook. "You don't understand. I loved you. I still love you." The words cut, sharper than I expected. Love. After betrayal. Love. After lies. It sounded like poison on his lips. "You don't betray the people you love," I said softly. "You don't make them question their worth, their sanity, their entire life." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. I was weak. I was afraid of the years, afraid of losing myself. And she was a distraction. Nothing more. Nothing more, I snapped, the words tearing out of me. She was everything you gave away, everything I thought was mine. Silence fell, heavy, suffocating. The rain beat harder against the windows, as if the sky itself was listening. Finally, his voice cracked into the stillness. "Then what do you want from me? Do you want me on my knees? Do you want me to beg?" I stared at him, 1,000 answers swirling in my chest. But only one rose to the surface. "I wanted your honesty. I wanted your loyalty. I wanted your love. And you gave it to someone else." His knees buckled. His hands covered his face. Tears spilled into his palms. Raw, broken, real. For the first time, he looked smaller than the lies he built. "I've lost everything," he whispered. "My name, my family, my work. And now you." The words hung in the air, but instead of pity, I felt only emptiness. The revenge that once tasted sweet now lingered bitter on my tongue. "You thought you could have it all," I said quietly, "and now you have nothing." He looked up at me, his eyes hollow, and in that moment, I realized the truth. I had won, but winning didn't feel like I thought it would. I turned away, my voice barely a whisper. "This is the end." The door closed between us, his cries muffled by the storm outside, and I stood in the silence, shaking, empty, free. The final revenge was complete, but the scars it left behind would last far longer than the storm. The days after the storm felt strangely quiet. No calls, no messages, no more chaos vibrating in my chest. For the first time in months, my world stood still. At first, I thought it was peace. But as silence settled into the walls of my home, I realized it was something else. It was emptiness, vast, heavy, unshakable. I had imagined this moment for so long, the moment he would crumble, the moment the truth would bury him. And I thought that would set me free. But freedom didn't come the way I expected. Everywhere I looked, there were ghosts, The restaurant where we laughed felt haunted. The park bench where he read me poetry felt abandoned. Even my own mirror reflected someone I hardly recognized. The revenge had burned him. Yes, but it had burned me too. Late at night, I would hear his voice in my head. I loved you. I still love you. Those words, once so sweet, now cut deeper than betrayal itself. Was it love? Or was it fear of being alone? Was it devotion? Or just desperation wrapped in pretty lies? The questions circled endlessly, and none of them had answers. I tried to move forward. I really did. I met friends for coffee, smiled when they asked how I was. I scrolled through old photos, deleting some, keeping others. But every action felt hollow. Every step forward felt heavy. Revenge had given me the power I craved. But it also left me holding ashes. Ashes of a man I once loved. Ashes of a life I once believed in. I remembered the first time I saw him. His confidence, his wisdom, the way he looked at me as if I mattered more than the world. That memory should have comforted me. Instead, it cut me open, reminding me of everything I lost. They say revenge is justice. But justice doesn't always heal. Sometimes it wounds the one holding the sword. Weeks passed, and slowly, the chaos outside faded. People moved on, found new scandals, new distractions. His name stopped trending. His betrayal became yesterday's story. But for me, it wasn't yesterday. It was every day. I would see couples walking hand in hand and wonder if trust could ever survive lies. I would hear love songs on the radio and wonder if love was ever real, or if it was always just a fragile illusion, waiting to shatter. One evening, I sat by the window, watching the sunset spill across the sky. The colors burned bright, orange, red, violet, and I realized life kept moving, with or without me. Revenge had given me closure on him, but it hadn't given me closure on myself. I whispered into the fading light, I forgive you, not for you, but for me. The words felt foreign, fragile, but true, because forgiveness wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about setting myself free. He would carry his shame forever. I knew that, but I refused to carry mine. I didn't need to love him anymore. I didn't need to hate him anymore. I just needed to let go. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace, not joy, but possibility. The possibility of new beginnings. The possibility of a love that didn't wound. The possibility of a future that wasn't defined by the scars of the past. Revenge had satisfied one part of me, but forgiveness would heal the rest. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, I closed my eyes, and for the first time since the betrayal, I breathed without the weight of a shadow. Some scars never fade, but even scars can remind us that we survived, that we are stronger than the storms we endure. And so, my story doesn't end with him. It ends with me, standing on the edge of something new, broken, but not destroyed, scarred, but not hopeless, alone, but finally free. If my story touched you, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, or the weight of loving someone the world didn't understand, know that you are not alone. Stories like mine remind us how fragile trust can be, and how powerful healing truly is. If you'd like to hear more journeys of love, loss, and finding strength again, stay with me here. Your presence means more than you know.